You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Welcome to the PBM Reform Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of pharmaceutical benefit management, cutting through the noise to uncover the truth. Since 2019, we've been your go-to source for the latest on how PBMs impact patient care, drug pricing, and the very future of pharmacy. Here, we champion the role of pharmacists, the most knowledgeable advocates for medication safety and expertise. Join us as we expose and generate discussions that are reshaping healthcare and explore how we build a better payment system which focuses on advancing pharmacy care.
Welcome to the PBM Reform Podcast here on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. My name is Breck Rice. I'll be your host today. And I have the privilege of speaking with somebody that has done quite a few interviews. In fact, the reason I reached out to Dr. Soliman was seeing an interview he did on TV about PBMs, about drug pricing. It was really interesting. I thought it was something that you would all be very interested in hearing about. And so I want to welcome to the program Dr. William Soliman, PhD and founder and also CEO of ACMA, and this is the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs, and very interesting background. I would love to get to know you a little better, but welcome to the show, Dr. Soliman.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Pleasure to be here.
Why don't you tell the audience here just a little bit more about your background and how you even came about to saying, hey, there was an opportunity here where the ACMA needed to be founded.
Yeah, absolutely. So, by background, like you mentioned, I'm a PhD by training, and we've been working, though, in the pharmaceutical industry for almost 20 years. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, kind of did everything you can imagine in the industry, from being a pharmaceutical sales rep when I started out, my early 20s, and then eventually becoming a medical science liaison, heading up MSL teams and medical affairs organizations. So I've done a lot of different things, worked for big pharma, mid-sized biotechs, rare disease, other more traditional areas. And in working for all these different companies over the years, what I uncovered is that a lot of the companies, when it comes to establishing standards and benchmarks for excellence in terms of practice and competencies for the pharmaceutical industry sales reps, the medical science liaisons, or even now the field reimbursement professionals, there wasn't any. There was nothing. So until the ACMA was founded, almost now it's been over 10 years, there were no standards or a benchmark of excellence for these professions. There was nothing in the industry. So we were the first back in 2015 to establish a benchmark of excellence and standards for the medical science liaison profession, the medical affairs profession, for pharma sales. And today, we're the leaders in this space. Our certifications and our standards have become the go-to for all pharmaceutical companies. And we work today with over 300 pharmaceutical companies. And we've been invited by the U.S. Congress. So in 2021, I went before the U.S. Congress Health Subcommittee and did a briefing with, at the time, Congressman Brett Guthrie out of the great state of Kentucky, talking about the importance of standards. So it's really been great to see the evolution in terms of what we do. And I think, there's a lot of scrutiny in the pharmaceutical industry because of the nature of the industry and the fact that a lot of people wonder about things like drug pricing, like we were just mentioning. I talked about the other day on television. I talk about it a lot with the Trump tariff issue. Why are drug prices so high? What are PBMs? What's their role? And, when Trump talks about them as a middleman, what does that mean? So I think what we've been able to do at the ACMA is bring a lot of these important issues to light, because in the end of the day, if these things are obstacles for patients being able to access medications, it becomes an issue. So I think having a benchmark for the profession elevates the profession in the industry, but also holds them accountable. So that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, that's excellent. And so tell us a little bit about where your background. Where did you get your PhD from?
Sure. So my PhD, my background's in biochemistry, biomolecular chemistry. I got it from Columbia University in New York, and went undergrad to New York University, NYU, the bachelor's in biochemistry. And born and raised in the New Jersey area. So I'm a New York, New Jersey guy. And our offices today are in the local New York, New Jersey area, in the Paramus, New Jersey area, for those that are familiar with the New York tri-state area. So we're really, I like to say we're a local company in the New York, New Jersey area, but we have a global footprint. We actually have learners in, now probably over 100 countries, which is crazy that when I say that. But we have learners that are enrolled in our programs from everywhere you can imagine, from Europe to South America. We have people in Azerbaijan and Turkey and Lebanon and all these countries. It's pretty amazing because, the pharmaceutical industry, of course, is global. There's professionals all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Columbia, not an easy school to get into. You must have done well in your undergrad.
Yeah, well, I was school, luckily, knock on wood, always came easily to me. So I was always pretty good student. Columbia is, it's a challenging school to get into. But it was a great experience for me. It was a very, rigorous academic experience, which I think is good. It kind of gives you, the ability to really make sure that you can apply strong work ethic. So I think you learn a lot of good work ethic at places like Columbia and NYU.
Yeah. Yeah. About 24 years ago, I believe it was, I got the opportunity to visit the campus. I was invited to come back and speak to their School of Journalism. And,
oh, nice.
It was got a tour of the campus and meet some of the students that were in that program, the journalism program at that time. But that's been many, many years ago. But what a wonderful campus, and sounds like you had a good experience there too as well. So, well, let's find out a little bit more what you had discussed on the interview that I was mentioning earlier, because you were talking about PBMs and also just wanted to understand their claim to helping lower costs. That's the PBM's claim, but what's the actual reality? And why is Trump saying, hey, there needs to be some adjustments here? It wasn't to affect the patient other than lowering the prices, but understood that there was somebody in the middle that was kind of controlling that.
Exactly. What a lot of people don't realize is in the pharmaceutical industry, when we set a price, that list price, that's not really what the pharma company collects, because there's many steps in the process. And for the pharmaceutical industry, unfortunately, there's an intermediary, which we call the pharmacy benefit manager, or the PBM, that provides what they're claiming is they provide a way to able to lower the price for the patient by negotiating discounts and rebates and things like that. But the issue is that the way that the pharmacy benefit manager makes money is by getting a rebate back basically from the pharmaceutical company, and they get a percentage of that. So the higher the cost of the drug, the greater their rebate actually. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. So it almost forces a pharma company to have to increase the price to make up for that. Right? So if there wasn't a PBM and the pharma company could just go directly to the payer or the insurance company, that would make things a lot easier. But what happens is there's this organization or these PBMs that then not just negotiate the discounts and the rebates and whatnot, but then they control where the drug goes in the formulary. And that is another problem because now a formulary, think of it as, different tiers or classes. Think about like, if you're in an airplane, you have first class, business class, economy plus and coach. I use that analogy, I think, for people that maybe aren't in the industry or aren't familiar. Because what I found is people, even in the industry, even healthcare providers, they don't know how it works. And to be honest, I don't blame them because it's very complex. But if you think about that in a plane, right, you have all these different classes. Everybody wants to be first class, right? It's expensive to be first class. It's kind of the same way with a drug. You want to be in the top tier. Why do you want to be if you're a drug in the top tier? Because if you're in the top tier, then you get a lower copay as a patient to get that drug. So if the drug's in the top tier, it lowers the copay for the patient. So the patient has a lower burden to have to get the drug. They have to pay less, right? So all the pharma companies, they're bidding to try to be top tier. But to become top tier, sometimes a lot of shenanigans happens. And that's where I think Trump is saying we need to re-examine this. And by the way, Trump in his first administration, to his credit, in my opinion, he brought this up. He brought this issue up of the middlemen or the PBMs, but then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, it obviously sidetracked everything and people, weren't paying attention to that. But this is an issue that was brought up in his first administration. Even the tariffs, by the way, this was something that he brought up in his first administration. But again, I think with COVID, a lot of things that he had wanted to accomplish, he wasn't able to accomplish. So I think, from my perspective, although I know Trump gets a lot of criticism, I think what he's trying to do, whether it's with the tariffs or with the PBMs, I think ultimately is going to be a positive for the United States, for the American public, because one, we have a lot of reliance on foreign countries for our medications. I talked about this the other day, when I was on NewsNation, Elizabeth Vargas, I was talking to her about the concern, because if you are relying heavily on countries like China and India, which, by the way, I don't know if you know, a lot of times the FDA can't get in to audit their factories, their manufacturing facilities. So we don't really know what the quality is like. There's been a few hundred deaths due to low quality products being produced, for counterfeit products. People get sick. In the best case scenario, sometimes you see situations where the product is not efficacious. We've seen a lot of situations like this in Africa. In South Africa in particular, they import a lot of drugs from China. They've had a lot of problems with that. So going back to the issue of standards like we were talking about at the outset, the truth is that we as a country need to make sure we have better control on these types of things. So I think forcing pharma manufacturers to invest domestically is important. And by the way, one of the things that people don't know about the ACMA, like I mentioned, we're in over 80 countries. We have an office in, for example, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Why I bring up Saudi Arabia is Saudi Arabia today, they're trying to mobilize their workforce. And what they're saying is we want to focus on our population and helping them grow their talent. We want to invest domestically in our country. So why I bring that up is that a lot of countries do that. So I don't know why there's a lot of criticism, when it comes to Trump on wanting to push pharma companies to invest. And we saw a few weeks ago, many of the big pharma, Roche, Novartis, Eli Lilly, said that they were going to now invest in building manufacturing plants. That's a good thing for the country. That's a positive thing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter who the president is. They're going to always be, criticized for everything that's done by at least 40% to 50% of the population. Right. Unfortunately, it does seem like that President Trump does get a little more of the share than most presidents, though. Unfortunately, so
yeah.
Let's go back, Dr. William, to the formulary to maybe help understand. Does anyone else control what goes on the formulary, or is that completely decided by a PBM?
Well, the insurers do, the payers do, because remember, the payers, they want to minimize what they pay out. Like any other insurance company, they want to minimize what they have to pay. We all know that people with, home insurance, car insurance, something breaks in your house or something happens, the insurance, they don't want to pay, right? It's just no different when it comes to health insurance providers. And what happens a lot of times is they set in place a lot of barriers that make it difficult to get reimbursement. A lot of times, and probably the biggest way they do this is through prior authorization. Now, I don't know if you know this, the ACMA, we actually have the first and only, it's become the standard now for the country, prior authorization certified specialist program. It's a certification program for prior authorization professionals. A lot of the field reimbursement professionals enroll in it. It's the number one program in the country for this. And what we found in working in the space is that the number one reason for care delay in America is due to prior authorization. 93% of care delay is due to prior authorizations. And they cost people, in the healthcare space, billions of dollars a year. So why I bring this up is that the control happens, on both ends. The control happens in you making it difficult for the healthcare provider to write particular prescriptions, or it could be a medical benefit, particular service or diagnostic. And then on the other side, making it difficult for the drug to be on a preferred formulary status in terms of being placed in those preferred tiers. And there's one last thing that I would say impacts it and that people aren't aware of. That's related to demand. So part of the game is that the pharmaceutical company needs to create demand. If there's high demand for the product, that can push it to go up to a more preferred formulary status or preferred tier in the formulary because there's demand. So that makes a big difference as well. The one last thing I'll say is that a lot of the drugs today that are coming through the pipeline, most of which are, oncology drugs or cancer drugs, but there's a lot of rare disease and ultra rare disease orphan products. Why I bring this up is that about 2-3 weeks ago in the news, something came out that, again, a lot of people may not have noticed, but that's important, which is that the FDA's new commissioner, Marty McCary, is trying to push for more accelerated or facilitated approval for rare disease products based on what? The mechanism of action. That's a big deal. Remember, historically in America, to get a drug to market, you need to have randomized controlled clinical trials. But what they're saying is that for rare disease products, it's difficult a lot of times to get a sample size that's big enough to power the trial adequately, to be able to get approval at the standards the administration is looking for, the FDA is looking for. So what he's proposed is, let's try to get this facilitated approval just based on whether or not the mechanism of action is plausible. So you can imagine a world where you would have these rare disease products based really on surrogate endpoints. Why I bring that up is that what you may see is that a lot of prescriptions are going to be written for these products off-label. So I'm curious to see if they're written off-label, how that will impact reimbursement. Mm-hmm. Because remember, if something's written off-label, the insurance company may give pushback in terms of reimbursement. And for those that are listening, what I mean by off-label here is that it's written for an indication not in the package insert, not in the label that was approved by the FDA. So for example, if, I'll use an example people know about, Wegovy for obesity, right? If someone says, a doctor says, I think Wegovy helps with headaches, and they write a prescription for Wegovy for headaches, that would be an off-label indication, right?
Yeah, so most of our pain medications started as a cancer treatment first.
Yep.
Before they off-label were used. Oh,
exactly.
Yeah, this also helps with migraines or,
right.
whatever. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Very interesting. So, when you think about this whole, bill that everyone's talking about and wondering, what the trickle down effects are going to be specifically to community pharmacy, because I see the intention, right, that Trump is trying to cut out some of the spread pricing that PBMs are taking advantage of today. And we know they make billions of dollars, and they have shareholders that they have to report to, and so they need to continue to make those billions of dollars. So what's that trickle down effect? Because I see the intention is there to do good by the patient, but what is that trickle down going to be? Either to lowering the cost for the patient, but then is the pharmacy, the community pharmacy, going to end up getting messed up over this as well?
I think for the community pharmacies today, a lot of these independent pharmacies, which, by the way, I founded US Pharmacy Lab, one of my other businesses, years ago, over 10 years ago. That was one of my first companies that I founded. We were an independent pharmacy, had a compounding lab as well that I've now sold. But so I have a lot of familiarity with this area. The issue really that they face is that a lot of times what the insurance reimburses them is the same or less than what they actually need to be able to make a profit. And I don't know if this is going to change that much, unfortunately. I know that's bad news for pharmacists listening out there who own a community pharmacy, but I don't know if it's going to make much of a difference to the pharmacy, right? Because a lot of times, and you see this a lot of times, the pharmacist would say, look, if you pay out of pocket, you can actually pay less, right? We saw that sometimes happening with pharmacists. So I don't know for pharmacists, though, if this will have much of an impact to them at that level. I think the bigger challenge, that's a whole other topic, but the bigger challenge for community pharmacies that I saw is dealing with these big chains, right? Because like CVS has their own PBM, and that makes it difficult. How do you deal with that, right? Because they're buying in bulk, they're buying, so per item, their cost is less. They can charge less. It's hard to deal with that at the community level. I think what community pharmacies have, and I think will always have, is service. I still use a community pharmacy. I use a local independent pharmacy because I see that they have much better service. So I think that's an area where they can excel, but I don't think this particular issue will have much of an impact for them.
Yeah. Well, Dr. William, do you want to give a shout out to that independent pharmacy?
I do. It's called US Pharmacy Lab. So it's the one pharmacy that I own that's local here in the area. David Yoon, who is the owner of the pharmacy there. He's phenomenal. He's fantastic, very responsive, and delivers our medications when we need it within an hour. He'll have the team deliver it. So, having a good pharmacist, having a really great community pharmacist that understands the patients at that level of depth in terms of the relationship, that's huge. And I think we've missed that in America with these big chains.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because if you look at the actual staff pharmacists themselves at a big chain, they want to give that service, but they're kind of have those golden handcuffs that say these are the three things that you need to do.
Yes.
And you can't come out from behind the bench and walk down an aisle with a patient and explain the differences between
Yes.
this cold medicine versus that cold medicine, which obviously you get that level of customer service when you go to an independent. Yeah, I absolutely love independent pharmacies and the service that they provide and give, and then also how quick they are too, right? You may wait several hours to get a prescription, at a chain, when you can get it in 10 minutes or less at any, community, independent community pharmacy. So
I tell you a true story. In the town, when we owned the pharmacy, we had a woman whose daughter had an asthma attack. Okay. And she had a prescription, in the pharmacy, but the mom, I don't know what happened. She couldn't get it. Anyway, that morning, the mom called frantically and said, my daughter's having an asthma attack. She was playing outside and she can't breathe. She's about to pass out. And the pharmacist went over. They drove over with the inhaler to the house, administered the inhaler to the girl, and then she was okay. But that story always stuck with me because that's the kind of like level of care as a health, because pharmacists are healthcare providers that I think we miss today. We don't have that relationship with our pharmacists anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Absolutely amazing. So, back to policies and um, different things that the you know that the pharmacy benefit managers put in place, where they say they're helping, either control costs or make sure it's the right medication on the formulary. In your opinion, what's the most frustrating or damaging PBM tactic or policy that currently exists today?
I think there's two things. One, I think, is price gouging when they're trying to force the companies to give them a bigger rebate, which forces the cost to go up on the list price. I think the second thing is ambiguity in the policies. Ambiguity. If people don't realize this, if you and I, we both go get, let's say, an MRI, and we get the MRI for the exact same thing, what you're going to get charged for your MRI and what I'm going to get charged can be very, very different. And why? We don't know. We don't know. We don't know why. We don't know how that gets negotiated. No one's really clear about that. And there's nothing legally to force them to be transparent about those contracts. So I think, to me, the lack of transparency is a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When we're looking at that trickle down effect, which, all community pharmacy is concerned about right now, what's the new drug pricing going to mean for them? And are they still going to be able to cover their overhead? One of the other trickle down effects that I don't think that was really explored until it already happened was with the Department of Labor. So DOL went out for bid for a new contract to look at, should they change their current pharmacy benefit manager. And the incumbent won the request for proposal, but another big PBM wanted that book of business, and so they sued to put a stay in place to make the federal government have to reopen the bid again. That process happened 2 or 3 times until the big PBM just came in and undercut and said, okay, we'll do it for these prices on these top medications, not realizing what the trickle down effect was going to be. So now, today, an independent pharmacy can't afford to fill the script for a postal worker or any federal employee because the rate is just so low that it doesn't even cover the cost of the medication,
Yeah.
let alone their overhead.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised to hear that. And, that's terrible, especially for that group of people, right? Who, they're middle class and they're struggling to begin with. A lot of them, if you're older and you have comorbid conditions, now you're on multiple medications. What do you do in that situation? So that's terrible. That's why I think we have to do something about it. That's why, going back to what the current White House administration is doing, I support it. I think long term it makes sense.
Yeah. It's also really frustrating to see, community pharmacies trying to survive, but being forced into networks that they don't need. And so you've got a lot of bundling out there with the big, controlling PBMs. So there's the 3 major PBMs that everybody knows, and they control about 80% of the lives.
Yep.
But they've gotten really wise to bundle networks, or they buy other PBMs and then bundle that PBM into their network. And so it's really hard for a community pharmacy to say, okay, we want to be in network with all of your commercial payers, your healthcare patients, but this network for auto injury just doesn't add up for us, or this network for workers' comp just doesn't work for us. Plus, most of them would have another option, but no, the big PBMs force them and say, hey, if you want these 65 million lives over here, it's all or nothing. You're either in
Right.
network or out of network. And so that really takes the opportunity for an independent community pharmacy to make the better reimbursements they could have going with another partner or another PBM, in fact, but they're stuck with going with one of the big three they know that they're going to, make pennies versus what they could on going with another provider.
And can I tell you from my experience, I remember trying to apply to be in network with these different PBMs. It's a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
It is a nightmare. They make it so difficult. It's just terrible. The process is terrible. And I'm convinced that they do it on purpose to make it difficult. By the way, it takes months. It could take months to get in. I'm sure you've heard horror stories about it, but It's terrible. Terrible experience. So that's a whole other thing. I think that's another tactic potentially, because they really want to discourage new independent pharmacies from coming up. They don't want them.
Yep.
They try to buy them
Yeah, or a new fully transparent PBM to try to break into the market. No, they really, they don't want transparency, so they want to make it as convoluted as possible so that they can add in their additional margins that they're going to make, the spread pricing. And so I think unbundling those networks and allowing true transparency for a pharmacy to choose what network makes sense for them and which ones don't make sense, I think would be a huge help as well. Do you think patients even understand how much the middleman has control over the cost of their medication, or is that another one of those that it's kind of behind the scenes and patients don't even really understand that?
I would say, unfortunately, most don't. Most don't understand how these things work. I think when you work in the healthcare space, you take a lot for granted that right? So for me, for example, I've been working in this space for a very long time. And a lot of my friends and colleagues who don't work in this area, when I tell them some of this stuff, they're shocked. They're shocked. They can't believe it. So they don't understand why things are the way they are in terms of how things get priced out and things like that. So no, I think that's another area probably from an educational perspective, like patient education. It's so important maybe that's the government's role to educate patients. If you ask most people, what's the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? The average person, they don't know. They don't. Yeah. That's been my experience. If I ask somebody that question, and they just don't know. It's a complex system. The healthcare system is complex. How, in every other area in industry, you buy something, you pay a price, and you get it received, and that's it. You get whatever the item is that you paid for received. And healthcare is very different. It's a very different process. And so how things are calculated in terms of what you're going to pay out of pocket, what the hospital charges or the doctor charges, it's a mystery. And it's funny. I'll tell you a quick story. One of my friends who I met here in the town where I live, he used to live in the UAE, in Dubai. And when he first came over here, he had tennis elbow. Okay, he had gotten injured, and he got tennis elbow, so he went to do physical therapy. And he thought that, for example, for each physical therapy session, they were going to charge the insurance company, let's say $200 per session, for example. And that's it. Then they pay the insurance company because he's paying for the insurance through his employer. So he pays the insurance company. They pay the physical therapist, the insurer, and that's it. And then he was surprised to get a big bill, on top of what he's paying for the insurance. And he came to me because he knows what I do, and he's like, I'm confused. I'm paying, $2,000-3,000 a month for insurance, through my company, and he pays a portion of that. So he might pay a few $100 a month, but still between him and the company, they're paying a lot of money for the payer. He's like, so why, if they're paying the physical therapist, why do I have to pay on top of that all this other money? Like, where did that come from? So I explained to him, and I got to tell you, he was shocked. He said, wow, in Dubai, whatever service you get an antibiotic, you get physical therapy, whatever it is, you never pay more than, I think he told me like $10 or $12. It was something like that. And he couldn't understand. And I joke about it till now with him. He's been here for a few years, because that story always stuck with me, because, if you're coming from another country and you now experience the U.S. healthcare system, it doesn't make sense when you think about it. It's not logical.
Yeah, no, I was speaking to a group of CEOs for self-insured companies out here in Phoenix, and we were discussing workers' compensation benefits. And it's such an afterthought, because, number one, they don't ever plan for anyone ever getting hurt, but the reality
Right.
is somebody is going to get hurt. But to understand and follow the money of what they're paying for.
Right.
With that injury. They were not one CEO in that room fully understood it. They had bits and pieces, but they didn't know that they were paying for, bill review to make sure that they paid the right amount for the prescription medication. They didn't know that the difference between the pricings and the different tiers that you talked about earlier, with the medication formularies. It was pretty, I guess, eye-opening to me that here were these, industry leaders that also didn't understand how complex and that was just one segment. We were just focusing just on workers' compensation and the medical spend, not the medical, sorry, the pharmacy spend under that. We didn't even get into the medical side, which is a whole nother can of worms, right?
Yeah.
So
I know.
when you owned your pharmacy, your compounding pharmacy, was there an experience that you had that you remember where, that was damaging to one of your patients because of a PBM either decision or formulary, or because you were making custom medications? Can you remember recall an experience?
Yeah, so a lot of times and I know there's a lot of controversy with compounding. It's a tough business, especially after what happened in New England with the whole meningitis situation. You probably remember years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But what I can tell you is many patients, especially patients, unfortunately, who had cancer. This was terrible. Many that had cancer, the delay in them getting their treatment because of these issues, these administrative burdens like prior authorization, that was terrible. Many stories where the people couldn't get treatment and they had to wait a few weeks and they needed the treatment. That was tough to see. And, we saw, obviously, what is it now, 6-7 months ago, what happened to the United Healthcare CEO, who got murdered by Luigi Mangione, which, of course, there's no justification for that. It's a terrible situation. And, that's crazy what happened. And my heart goes out to the United Healthcare CEO's family. But my point is that think about the level of anger that this guy must have had to go out and murder this United Healthcare CEO. And then look at the reaction of the public. Right. Of course, I mean, look, nothing justifies murdering somebody. That's clearly evident. However, the fact that you had a lot of people on social media cheering this guy on, the murderer, as if he was a hero, that's scary.
Yep.
That's really scary. But I also think it points to something important, that Americans are frustrated. They're frustrated by the system today. They're frustrated by the fact that they can't get their medications when they need to. They're frustrated by the increase in cost. They're frustrated by the lack of transparency. and especially people in lower socioeconomic conditions. There's a lot of data on this, I'm sure you know. People with lower socioeconomic status typically fare worse when it comes to healthcare outcomes. We know that, so there needs to be something done about that. And I think, again, thinking about ways to educate patients, thinking about ways to streamline prior authorization. I'll tell you, when we train a lot of the people who are doing the prior authorizations, many of them tell us, we never got training on how to do it. We don't even know how to approach this problem. So, which is why I think the PACS program, we call it the PACS program, the Prior Authorization Certified Specialist Program. Why it's so popular is because it's the only structured program really in the country that's accredited and gives you that training for field reimbursement or prior authorization. But we need it because the healthcare providers, staff members, they're kind of handicapped in the sense they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the training to deal with all these pushbacks from the payers. So, I would say that, if anything, I think that the Luigi Mangione murder of the United Healthcare CEO is really like a watershed moment. It's a watershed moment. It reminds me of the opioid crisis. And you might say, how's that related? The opioid crisis back, I guess now it's 67 years ago, when it really kind of blew up, when Purdue Pharma, J&J, when they all were, getting sued by the different states and whatnot. That was a watershed moment because that told us that without proper standards for pharma companies, people go rogue sometimes. Not all the time. Look, most of the people working in the pharmaceutical industry, they're excellent. But you have some people that, operate unethically. And that's why you need something that level sets and creates uniformity or in terms of competencies. And I think the same holds true with the prior authorization situation. I think health insurance, kind of became prime time when this issue happened, this murder happened, because people are like, well, wait, what, why murder the United Healthcare CEO? What does United Healthcare do? What is a payer? What's their role in this? What is prior authorization? Again, a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know. So.
Yeah. You bring up a good point with the states taking action, right? And we've recently seen several states start to take action against PBM-owned pharmacies, right? So Arkansas probably being the one of the leaders in that, but there's 30 some odd other state district attorneys that have jumped on that bandwagon and said, hey, this is a pretty good idea. Maybe we shouldn't have PBM-owned pharmacies in our state. What do you think is going to come of that?
I think it could potentially cause a domino effect across the country because there's a conflict of interest. Like I was talking about earlier with these big chain pharmacies that they have their own PBM. To me, that's a conflict of interest. And I'm surprised until now that nothing's been done about it. But, again, they have powerful lobbying groups and it's difficult sometimes to elicit change given that. But I think we need to see that across the country if we're going to really expect any type of appreciable change.
Yeah. To your point that there's not only powerful lobbying groups, but also many attorneys on staff too, that these big, PBMs, big chains have. Certainly going to be some pushback, I would guess, on the state's decision to say, hey, we no longer want any PBM-owned pharmacy in our state.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure 100%. I mean, it's just like the pushback. Look, there was pushback. What was it? A few weeks ago when Trump announced the whole thing about making sure that we had pricing for our drugs that was comparable to other countries. Remember that executive order that he passed? And right away, insurance pharma companies, their attorneys began to mount a legal battle against the executive order. So I'm sure that's going to happen.
Yeah. Are there any other changes in reform that you would like to see happen?
I think one of the things, and again, this is a kind of a tangential topic, is related to biosimilars and biologics. I think for people that don't know, biosimilars are generic versions of a biologic. And I think it would be important as more and more biosimilars come to market that we better understand or have better standards and practices around reimbursement policies there, because that's kind of a new area in many ways, biosimilars and biologics. And I think having more clarity there is going to be important, because look, ultimately biosimilars, they present a very good opportunity to get these expensive drugs at a cheap cost, right? At a much less expensive cost. So figuring that out and how to reimburse for that is going to be important.
I think that is past due in having that come around, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So
100%.
hopefully that'll happen. So, well, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, and just for our listening audience, I want to do a rapid fire fun facts about you. So this is just super fun. First thing that comes into your head, really easy. So, are you more of a early bird or a night owl?
Early bird.
Okay. And do you prefer the mountains or the beach?
The beach.
Coffee, tea, or something else?
I'm actually mostly a water drinker.
Oh, good for you.
Not really nice coffee or tea. Yeah.
That's excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. William Soliman, for being our guest today, CEO and founder of ACMA. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you better and having you on the podcast. You're listening to the PBM Reform podcast here on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. My name is Breck Rice, and always advocate for community pharmacies. They really are the heart of our community. And thank you so much for being here and being our guest today, Dr. William. It's great to get to know you. Yeah,
real pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Until next time. All right. Stay curious, everyone.